So guys, moving on now to efficiency and why it matters. Because we're having an hour-long webinar on this. There's got to be a reason why efficiency is important. So Carl, could you just explain what this here on the slide is pointing to?
Yeah, I use this. I love this chart, by the way. So I use this for the first time live during one of our OPEX Gyms masterminds, and we were talking about where and how we're spending our time inside of our coaching practice. And I wanted to present this to our gyms because I wanted to just ask them, how much time are you spending inside of TrueCoach and on consultations, right? Like how much time are you spending doing those things? And in that room, we had coaches that were 40, 50, 60, 80 clients per individual, right? And you see my chart doesn't even go that high. But it's always interesting when I ask that question, and I'm like, hey, if you spend 20 minutes per week designing a training program inside of TrueCoach versus 10 minutes designing that same training program, just do the math, right? If you have 40 clients and you're spending almost 20 hours a week designing training programs for those clients, if I were to ask you guys if you could spend half the time and still deliver a great program design, would you guys take it? And the answer is always like, yeah, of course, right? And we don't want you guys to be efficient because we want you guys to go and do other things and have time to spend with your family and stuff like that. Yes, we all want that, but we want you guys to be efficient because we want you guys to be able to spend time in other aspects inside of your coaching practice, right? Like if we're designing training programs, guys, for 20, 25 hours a week, how many hours a week are you on the floor if you're coaching in an on-site facility? How many hours are you spending onboarding brand new clients? How many hours are you spending marketing your service, right? So we have to understand that although program design, we believe it's extremely important, it shouldn't take up all of our time, right? Because program design, and we'll talk about it when we talk about competency, program design is just getting from what's inside of your brain into TrueCoach. That's it. That's what program design is. Once we have the competency and what's inside of our brain is, once those lead to effective program designs and solid principles, it's like that should be like clockwork, guys. So we shouldn't be spending hours and hours and hours and hours every single week behind a computer designing training programs if we don't have to.
And I am curious, guys, could you throw in the chat box, on average, how long does it take you to write a week of program design for a client? And yes, that PD min is program design per minute.
And as you guys write that, there's nothing wrong with spending 30 minutes per week per client, if that's what you want to do, right? But I just want to ask you guys, what is your time worth, right? Like, what is your time worth? And when we first get started in our coaching practices, gosh, I remember the days where I spent 45 minutes to design a week of training. There's nothing wrong with that, right? But we have to improve upon that. And we're not saying that everyone needs to get to a point where they're designing 30-second training programs, because you cannot design an effective training program in 30 seconds with the technology that we have currently. So just look at where you're at right now and compare yourself to the time that you're spending in program design next week to where you're at now, right? Like, don't worry about what people are putting in the chat box and like, oh my God, John Davis is spending 5 to 10 minutes. I need to get there. It's like, no, if you're still at 40, get to 38 first.
And Santiago did ask how he could improve his efficiency, and really, like, that's what you're going to learn today, Santiago. So we've got some good stuff coming for you. So guys, a little bit more on efficiency before we really get into the method. We have these big blue circles on the screen, which I loved. So Carl, could you explain what this graph here is and what it means to a coach?
Yeah, definitely. So these are just some pieces that I want everyone to consider when you start looking at, or when you start asking yourself, how can I be more efficient in my practice, right? So the first thing that we have to throw out there, right, because this is what we do, we're an education company, is you have to be competent, right? Like, you have to understand fitness. You have to understand exercise principles. You have to understand those things to be an efficient program designer. So relative to competency, ask yourself, what do you know? and what are your capabilities. So if you know that you know resistance training really, really well, if you know how to program and let's call it progress aerobic training really, really well, just do those things inside of your practice. If you don't know how to use bands and chains and contralateral this and that with a band on your face, if you don't know that stuff, guys, don't use that in your practice today, because that's going to make you less efficient, because your competency is very low when it comes to doing all of those things. So you have to be competent. And that's not a judgmental thing by any means. It's just understand what you know and what you don't know, and use the things that you know really, really effectively. The next piece is, or the next consideration I should say, is environment. So what are the external variables? And how can you change these variables to set you up for success? Right? So it's like, if you guys can get into a nice rhythm and a nice flow by sitting on your couch with the TV on and social media up and responding to Instagram DMs and all of that while you design training programs, and that's a great environment for you and you can get really efficient with that, do it. But that's not the case for most people, right? Most people have to set themselves up in a particular environment to be successful in being more efficient in program design. And usually it's a very similar environment to our ideal learning environment, right? Because our brain is on, our brain is working, and we want to find rhythm, right? So when we get to rhythm, it's you have to ask yourself, how do you find yours? Because that's going to be different from myself to Georgia to all of you guys on this call. Like, we find rhythm in different ways. So what time of the day are you designing training programs? Is that planned? Is that in your calendar where it's like, okay, I have 60, 90 minutes, 2 hours every Friday morning from 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. to design training programs? Is that locked in? Can you find a rhythm with that time frame? Are you using a laptop? Are you using a desktop? Do you have to use a mouse when you design training programs? Are you a master at hotkeys, right? Like, really understand what can get you into that rhythm to be successful. And then look at your environment, right? Because that goes back up to environment, right? We're not going to get in a great rhythm if we're not in an environment that'll set us up for success. Consider the number of designs that you can even do in a session, right? So you can be very, very, let's call it efficient, just to keep using that word. You can be very efficient through 10 clients, but when you get to client 11, that 5 to 10 minutes per client is now 10 to 15 minutes. And then when you get to 15 clients, it's 20 to 25 minutes. And then you have to take a break and come back, right? Like, you're probably setting yourself up for failure if you're trying to design for too many clients in one sitting. There's 7 days in the week, split them up appropriately. And then understand what type of designs you're doing on those days, right? So if you have a book of clients of 40, 20 of them are competitive fitness athletes that are training 8 times a day, and the other 20 are general population people that are training 2 times a week, right? It's like, understand what days you program for those people, not only relative to the flow that you can get into and how you can go from one client to another, but consider time, right? Because if you're designing 3 a days, 6 days a week for a number of clients, it's just going to take you longer to sit down and design for those clients. And there's more things that you have to consider and think about. And then once we get through those things, it's like, okay, now we should find a state of flow, right? So I'm just going to throw some adjectives out at you guys to kind of describe what flow could mean for you. It's like, you're absorbed in what you're doing. The task that you're doing, you're like in it. There's no other distractions. You're just in that task. You're extremely focused. What you're doing is challenging to you, right? But it's not overly challenging. It's like a problem presents itself in your head and you figure that problem out in 5 to 10 seconds and then you're back at it, right? So it challenges you to an extent. It energizes you, right? You feel confident and you're having a good time. So you're enjoying what you're doing. So if you ever feel those adjectives when you're doing any activity, you're probably in a state of flow, right? It's like, I can do this, all day, right? Like 30 minutes passes and you're like, wow, that felt like 5 minutes.
Guys, I'm curious, in the chat box, is there one of these three areas that you feel is preventing you from reaching a flow state when you program design? Of competency, environment, and rhythm, which one do you feel like you're lacking in? We are going to move on to the OPEX method while you guys get that in the chat box. But one key thing I want to point out is the topic of this webinar is program design efficiency. But what we're about to go into and what we're going to give you to really enhance your efficiency is going to be about what happens before that program design. And it's taking the steps on the front end and putting a method and systems in place before you actually get down to write your reps and sets and exercise selection that really are going to make you a more efficient coach. Looks like there's a pretty even split between the three. So just good to have that reflection, guys, that everyone has slightly different struggles with reaching their efficiency, just like our clients have different struggles with reaching their fitness goals. So guys, let's pass it back to Carl to really walk us through the OPEX method, which is our approach to writing efficient programs.
Cool, thanks, Georgia. Yeah, I had a conversation yesterday with a guy from Ireland, and he asked me a really good question. He asked, what is the most common mistake that you see in fitness with fitness coaches? Like what's the thing holding them back the most? And I know he was kind of teeing me up, right? Because we were talking about education and blah, 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 and knowledge and all of that. So he was kind of teeing me up, and he expected me to say, oh, coaches just don't know enough. They need to get into OPEX and they need to learn more. Right? It's like, but I don't think that's the thing that's holding us back as coaches. I think our confidence in what we know is what really holds us back as coaches. Right? So I can appreciate that. I'm seeing a lot of competencies coming into the chat box, but take a step back. And if you have experiences coaching your clients and you've taken any education, right? It's like, get really, really good at the things that you know to be true inside of your head. And don't second guess those things, right? It's always good to challenge ourselves, right? But if you spend time second guessing everything that you do, that's going to lead to massive inefficiencies, right? And I just want to tie it back to the topic that we're talking about. But inefficiencies usually come from a lack of confidence. It's like, hey, I'm going to do back squats at a 3-1-2-2 tempo. And then you delete that and you're like, maybe it should be 3-1-X2. And then you know what I mean? So it's like, you're just second guessing yourself over and over and over again. So just get really confident in the knowledge that you do know. And as you add knowledge, right, like use that stuff, use those principles that you learned through whatever education that you learned it through. Hopefully it's through OPEX, but use that stuff over and over and over and over again, and you guys will become so confident in what you do know, and that will lead to massive efficiencies in your coaching practice. And your clients will appreciate it because everyone likes a confident person to look up to, especially if it's your fitness coach and they're telling you what to do in your fitness.
A lot of people really appreciating that comment in the chat box, Carl.
Cool, awesome. Thanks, guys. All right, I'll get back on track. All right, intake. So yeah, I mean, it says efficiency starts here, but I would say that this is the starting point of context, right? It's not the starting point of a coach-client relationship because we're not doing anything face-to-face. We're sending our clients an intake form, cool, right? But it's like we have to have context to get to our next step, which is going to be an initial consultation, right? So an intake form is really important because just think about the first time that you met a professor, right? Or the first time that you met, if you've had a fitness coach or a personal trainer. It's like, you're not just going to spew everything out and tell them about your life story and tell them about your illnesses and your sicknesses and all of that, right? Like this is a really safe place for a lot of clients to give you the information that you need for you guys to get started. So the intake form is very, very simple. As you can see on the screen, I mean, we're asking, a few questions. We're sending it over to our clients. And then when they come and sit down during that initial consultation, we have context.
Guys, throw us a yes or no in the chat box. Do you use an intake form with your clients? Lots of yeses. Love that.
Keep it, if you guys are, guys, continue to do that, but keep it really, really simple. I remember gosh, it was probably 5 or 6 years ago. We were sending out intake forms and they were like 3 pages. And I was like, why is not everyone filling out every question inside of this intake form? And B, if they are, I'm not really digesting it enough and, recapping that intake form during an initial consultation, or I just like put it in my file somewhere and I never look at it again because I'm like, I don't want to read a book on this person, right? I'm going to start creating my own notes. So keep that intake form really, really simple.
So next step, Carl, consultation.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, this is the starting point of the coach-client relationship. And we would argue to the death actually that this is the cornerstone of individualization or personalization, because this is where we start to build relationships. We're talking about behavior, exercise, and nutrition inside of this consultation, but we're also building trust with our clients, right? Our clients are getting comfortable with us. They're building trust not only in the words that we're telling them, but we should give off this kind of array of, we are a fitness coach, right? Like we know what we're doing, but we're not on our pedestal and like telling you to do A, B, and C because we know what we're doing. We're working together, right? It's like I have this level of knowledge as a coach. I need to convey that knowledge in certain circumstances to you, right? As a client of mine that knows nothing about fitness. And I need to ask you deep questions, right? I need to ask you about your goals. I need to ask you about your experiences. I need to be craftful enough to connect my knowledge and what I think you need to do in your fitness, in your lifestyle, in your behavior to your goals, right? Like our clients should come out of that 60-minute consultation thinking, wow, I wish I would have hired this person way sooner. I cannot wait to get started with them, right? So there is very particular information that we propose that we need to gather from this initial consultation. But gosh, I would just take a step back and look at this as, this is the starting point of this relationship. And this is our first opportunity to build trust with our clients.
On top of building trust, Carl, what kinds of expectations would you set with the client, more from a logistics sense, for the relationship to make sure that it's efficient for you and for the client moving forward?
Yeah, it's a good question. And depending on what you guys are doing in your coaching practice, you have to make that really clear with your clients, right? So if you're giving them an individualized program, tell them what day to expect the next 7 to 14 days of their individualized program, right? It's like, hey, I program for you on Sundays. So you'll always see Sunday to Sunday. And then when Saturday comes, maybe don't shoot me a message and ask me what you're doing Monday because you'll see that on Sunday, right? Set expectations and communication, right? And I'm not going to set those expectations for you guys, on this webinar today, but think about how often you want to communicate with your clients, right? Are you communicating with your clients every single day in TrueCoach, in text messages, in emails, in calls, Zooming? Like think about what that communication and the cadence of that communication is going to be and set those expectations extremely clearly on the front end. But because we're talking about efficiencies, right? Don't set an expectation that you're talking to them every single day on the phone. Like don't do that, or you're never going to be able to build efficiencies. Unless, of course, they're like Kevin Hart or something and he's giving you $2,000 a session, right? Then it's like, okay, yeah, talk to that dude every single day. So yeah, set expectations there. And then set expectations in regards to how often are we going to sit face-to-face or over Zoom and have this conversation, talking again about your behavior, your exercise, and your nutrition in a monthly consultation.
So moving on now to the assessment. Why is this so important for efficiency? And I guess, what is it first?
Yeah, the assessment is just, it's gaining an understanding of where our clients sit today, right? It's not enough to have an hour conversation and take our clients' words for it, right? It's like we've all had a conversation with a client. They're like, yeah, I squat, 350 pounds and, my all-time PR deadlift, they don't tell you it was 10 years ago. My all-time PR deadlift was 600 pounds. You know, I'm a great mover. My work capacity is outstanding. But it's like, okay, cool. Like, thank you for those insights, but I'm going to assess you and I'm going to gain my own understanding of where you sit today. Right. So we do that in OPEX body, OPEX move, and OPEX work. Right. So body, we're just gathering body composition data, whether that's through an in-body or indirect methods. We're doing a movement screen and we're doing a work capacity test. Very simple. We throw everyone on an assault bike and we ask them to accumulate as many calories as possible over a 10-minute time period. And then on an ongoing basis, we call them fitness monitoring exercises, right? So now we can start talking about what's your back squat 1 rep max, right? What's your strict pull-up 1 rep max? And we can go down a bunch of rabbit holes based on patterns, but we're just gathering data over time. But something that I think is really important to understand in an assessment is that we're working with human beings and we're working with people that have insecurities. So I know that some of you guys can kind of empathize with, you know, you sit down to take an exam and you're nervous, right? And you're self-conscious and you're second guessing yourself. Our clients also feel that way when we tell them that we're going to assess them, right? So think of an over-fat individual jumping on an in-body, right? You have to set them up for that. Like, you can't say, oh, not a big deal, we're just going to get your body fat percentage. And they're super self-conscious about their body composition. You have to set them up for that. You have to have a conversation. You have to make them understand why it's important to gather that data and how that can connect to the conversation that you had in that initial consultation about them wanting to lose 30 pounds one day, right? You have to set them up for that. Think about if you have a poor mover and they're very self-conscious about the way they move, and you're asking them to do a comprehensive movement screen, right? It's like you have to have a conversation and set them up for that. And then finally, think about if you have someone that is, they perceive themselves to be really out of shape and they're ashamed of that, right? They may have been a competitive athlete in their past, and, you know, in their brains, they're always comparing themselves to other people. And you ask them to accumulate as many calories on an assault bike in 10 minutes, they may feel really uncomfortable doing that. So always give context as to why you're assessing people. Don't just expect that they're going to understand why these things are important. So context is really key as we're assessing our clients.
Carl, just without getting lengthy, Emily had a quick question in the chat box around assessing remote or virtual clients. Could you give a quick couple pointers on how you can or can't do that?
Yeah, definitely. You know, I won't say you can't do anything, right? Because there's always a workaround or a way to do it. You know, just as, you know, inside of what we do at OPEX and our coaches going through our CCP program, we want that to be 100% face-to-face. And that's for a couple reasons. Performing face-to-face assessments, it's better because you learn more things about your client as opposed to being on Zoom or telling them to film something and send you that film. But if you guys are, you know, in a remote coaching business or you want to start a remote coaching business, there is a way to still get this information, right? So just going down body, move, and work, it's like, you know, whatever program design software you use, I'll just stick with TrueCoach for now. If you're using TrueCoach, it's like program a day of OPEX body, OPEX move, and OPEX work, but give them context. It's like OPEX body, I want you to jump on an in-body and upload that data. Oh, an in-body is not available. Okay, I get it. I want you to send me your body weight. Maybe if they're an aesthetics-driven client, you have some progress photos that you want them to send you over so you can kind of get an idea of where their body fat percentage is, or you can get the information that you need to calculate all of that data in an indirect method to get the information that you would get from an in-body anyway. A movement screen, right? Like, it's, you know, I can go, you know, let's call it part B is just OPEX move. And I have all of our movement screens there with videos attached, walking them through exactly how I want to do those. I'm telling them exactly what angles I want them to film them at. And I'm telling them to press play, go through this entire movement screen, and then press stop. So you're not uploading 6, 8, 10 different videos, right? Just give them really clear instructions. And most clients will be just fine with that, and they'll execute it okay, right? But understand if they do an assessment wrong, it's going to, the feedback loop is just a little bit longer, right? So if you ask someone to do a reverse plank and you wanted their fingers to be pointing away, and they send you a video with their fingers pointing toward them, it's like, ah, crap, that was the wrong assessment. Do I redo that? Am I just good with this, right? And like that goes across the board. So there has to be a level on the client side where they can just go out and do it and you feel comfortable with them doing it. And then a work capacity test, it's like, yeah, jump on an assault bike, go 10 minutes, take a picture of your summary screen and send that over and give me some ideas of how you felt during that.
Thanks for hitting on that, Carl. I do think it's an important one to cover, given social distancing right now, and a few people wondering about that in the chat. We will move on though now to the 3 Ps, starting with priorities, and really the transition from what you've just discussed, intake, consultation, assessment, to setting yourself up to write the design.
Yeah, so priorities they have to be our roadmap, right? Because what we get from a conversation and what we get from an assessment is we get a lot of data, right? Or we get a lot of notes, a lot of things that we wrote down. But it's like without going through the process of organizing or prioritizing the notes and the deficiencies or efficiencies that you found inside of the conversation and inside of the assessment, those are just a bunch of notes that are going to sit in a notebook or on your whiteboard, right? It's like you have to identify what are priorities. You have to prioritize your priorities and order them. Like, if someone wants to lose the 30 pounds that I talked about earlier, and let's say that they came in at 90 calories on the assault bike in the OPEX work test. It's like priority number 1 probably isn't to get them to 150 calories as fast as possible if all they want to do is lose 30 pounds, right? So you will come out of a consultation and an assessment with a lot of information and a lot of data. But we have to organize that data, and that data will serve as our roadmap and how we move forward in our coaching practice with all of our clients.
So moving on to our second P, planning.
Yeah, so planning is when you sit back and you look at the priorities, you look at where your client is, you look at their experiences, you look at what equipment they have available, you look at how many days they have available to exercise, and you start to organize your brain and how you're going to put this thing into play, right? So you're planning the training program. You're not in and periodizing yet, and you're not designing macro cycles and mesocycles and all of that quite yet, but you're just organizing your brain around, okay, I have this client, these are their priorities, these are the tools that I have to work with relative to equipment, which is a really important conversation, especially now where a lot of clients don't have a lot of tools at their fingertips, right? So you have to consider that before you build the plan and before you build the training cycle. So this is just an opportunity to reflect, right? Reflect before you actually go into designing.
And finally, periodization, our third P.
Yeah, I'm not going to go too deep into this, guys. I mean, the slide shows, different phases of training and different mesocycles, but just think about periodization as, you have an outcome that you want to get to, and there's reverse engineering that comes into play, right, to get to that outcome. So if you call your programs accumulation or intensification or whatever the hell you call it, it doesn't really matter. If you have an outcome that you want to get to and you're reverse planning to get there, you're doing periodization, right? Like you're going into this thing with a plan and there's an outcome in mind, right? So periodization is just reverse engineering the outcome. And for, especially a lot of beginners, you don't spend a lot of time here like reverse engineering, right? Unless you have someone that needs to lose that 30 pounds by this date and you're trying to figure out the best and safest way to get there. It's almost like a flow, right? It's like, I understand accumulation and what's inside an accumulation phase, and my beginner is going to get most of that, right? If I have an intermediate client, maybe they're bouncing between, a lot of volume and then lowering the volume and giving them heavier weights because I want them to get stronger, and then going back to a lot of volume. And then, if you have an advanced client, maybe you're thinking, more similarly to how you would approach a beginner client. So just think about periodization as, having an outcome and wanting to get there through exercise.
Before you take us inside of Coach RX, Carl, quick question, because what we've described, this method, it takes time. Like you do have to put time and energy into periodization, planning, conducting assessments, taking notes. Why does putting time in with a method like this on the front end make coaches more efficient when they actually put fingers to keyboard or pen to paper if you're old school and start writing their programs?
Yeah, it's because you're not starting at zero every week, right? There's nothing more, well, I should say there's nothing less efficient than sitting behind your computer and starting at zero every single time you get behind your computer, right? So it's like the time that we spend on the front end planning, it's going to take a little bit longer than writing, a couple days of design, but it's going to save a lot of time throughout that 6, 8, 12, 16 weeks, however long that training program is. It's going to save a lot of time on a week-to-week basis. And I've been in contact with a lot of coaches that do this thing many, many different ways, and they find efficiencies in that way. But usually people that don't plan and still find efficiencies in not planning, they're one-offs, right? It's like we can't teach people to just, wing it and go. So that's why we teach coaches to be very diligent in the planning process. And by diligent, I don't mean spend an hour to plan a training cycle for a client. By diligent, I mean just do that consistently and over and over and over. You'll get to a point where it takes you 5 minutes to design an entire 16-week training cycle for someone. And then coming off of that, it may take you another 10 minutes to build their first week. And then, maybe you're at 6, 7, 8 minutes on a week-to-week basis throughout that training cycle. So you can kind of see how, planning on the front end just saves us time in the long run.
You ready to take us inside of Coach RX, Carl?
It sounds like we're like going on an adventure or something, but yeah. Right.
Cool. I'm going to stop my share.
Cool.
It's all you.
All right. Can you see that?
I can. Guys, can you see the screen? Give us a yes in the chat box if you're with us. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome, guys. So yeah, this is what Coach RX looks like today on the back end, right? So everything that we just walked through, there's a place for it in Coach RX. So this thing was built for our coaches to implement our methodology directly without having workarounds, right? So I'll just take you guys through each section, and then Georgia, if someone has any specific questions, can you just stop me and I'll just answer that question there, and then we'll do a real Q&A at the end.
Absolutely.
Cool. Awesome. So we have assessment, we have OPEX body, we have OPEX move, and we have OPEX work. So as I assess a client, I just take them through here. I put their weight in pounds, their body fat percentage. Coach RX tells me what healthy ranges are relative to what we teach inside of CCP. And if we're outside of healthy ranges, I'll get a little red number there, just as like an idea of like, hey, take a look at this. That's it. I put in their skeletal muscle mass, basal metabolic rate, and then muscle fat analysis. So this is information that we gain from the InBody relative to the muscle fat analysis. OPEX move, I take them through a movement screen, right? So if you're a newer coach and you just went through CCP, you just learned the movement screen, we just have dynamic tool tips that tell you how to perform this movement screen, what to look for, right? So, let's say that we fail a scratch test, right? So I fail it. Coach RX is going to ask me why we failed that scratch test. And let's say the shoulder blade was winging. Coach RX is going to ask me, what do I think the cause was? I'm just going to say it was a lack of body awareness. I'm going to click that. And then you can see in the top right, as I walk through this, priorities are added to my client's profile. And then I'll get to priorities in the 3P section. And I'll tell you kind of how that works and how we want to utilize the priority section inside of Coach RX. Then finally, OPEX work. So we have assault bike 10-minute calories. So we have a raw score as well as a weight converted score. So our raw score, we get a percentile based on the data that we have inside of CoachRx today. And then we have our weight converted score that also has a percentile relative to clients that are inside of CoachRx. Next, we have fitness monitoring exercises. So this screen, I just like to use this as like a nice structural balance look, right? So we see some reds here. That just makes me open my eyes and say, okay, what's going on with the front squat, right? So I go to my dynamic tooltip and it tells me that I'm looking for my front squat to be 85% of my back squat for structural balance. We're not quite there. So maybe that's a priority that I want to add for my client here as I walk through this structural balance view. So you can just, I'm not going to go through all of these guys, but you can kind of walk through and see all of our fitness monitoring exercises, and we can see discrepancies in percentages, whether they're over in red, or sorry, under in red or over in amber. Next, we have consultations. So let's say that I'm performing a monthly consult with my client. I'm just going to click new monthly consult. CoachRx is going to give me some ideas of questions to ask based on what we propose inside of CCP. I fill that out. I fill any additional notes. As I go through that consultation, if I realize that I have, priorities that have been revealed, I can also add those here separated by commas, and they'll go into that 3P section. So we just love the idea of in every client communication, or every time that we're looking at client data, we have the opportunity to add priorities, because we might notice something in that conversation, or we might notice something when we look at that data. So we have that with an initial consultation as well as monthly consultations. And then you'll see these bars at the top here, guys, and you'll see, this client has, 1 filled, 3 filled, 0 filled. And all this means is that our client has gained or not motor control, strength endurance, or max contractions based on what we teach in CCP. So if I have a client that has a 0 on the squat and they haven't gathered motor control, it tells me what I need to work on in their training program. I need to work on motor control activities, and I don't need to do a 1 rep max back squat every other week with this client, because they haven't developed motor control quite yet in the squat pattern. So these are outputs that are based on the assessment as well as fitness monitoring exercises. And then when I have 3 bars filled, it's like open season, right? It's like I can do anything I want inside of that pattern, because they've proven that they have both structural balance and they have the max contraction, let's call it barrier of entry, that we propose. They've passed both of those. So I can do whatever I want in the pull pattern with that client. Finally, we have the 3 Ps. So in the 3 Ps, this is where we're adding, we're updating, we're taking away priorities. So you notice that I failed my client in the scratch test, and I said it was it was shoulder blade winging. What that shot out to me was it told me to perform high time under tension push and pull exercises, right? So if I don't like that and I don't agree with it, I can delete it, I can add to it, I can do whatever I want here in the priority section. But this is kind of like our house of, this is our roadmap for our clients. These are the things that we need to work on. Then under the planning section, we see our priorities again. We see their training schedule. What days of the week are they exercising? We see their equipment list. And then we can move on to periodization. So once we get to periodization, we have this broken up into 3, let's call it 3 components. It's long-term planning, short-term planning, and daily planning. So first, we have to create a long-term plan. So you guys that aren't in CCP, you guys would just know this as a macro cycle, right? So we just call it long-term in CCP, but it's a macro cycle. So we pick our start date. Let's say this client is starting today. We pick our end date. Let's say they're going to December 31st. Actually, let's say they're going November 7th. It spits out the length in weeks. We can update our priorities. We can add additional notes, and then we create that long-term plan. Once we're inside that long-term plan, we get a view like this. So before we create any mesocycles or short-term plans, this is just completely empty. So when we create a short-term plan, we choose, is this an accumulation phase, intensification, so on and so forth. CoachRx tells us what should be inside of that phase, principally. We choose our start date. We choose how many weeks in length that is. It spits out our end date. We have our cycle priorities that we can, again, update if we need to. We have cycle notes that we can put in here. Sustain type, or the type of aerobic work that we're doing. So we teach MAP 10-1 in CCP, so we choose what type of aerobic work we're doing. We can put notes here. Am I doing cyclical aerobic work? Am I doing mixed aerobic work? What am I doing relative to that MAP 6 work? And then we call anaerobic work OPEX pain. So am I doing alactic power all the way to lactic endurance 3? I choose, and then I put notes there. So once I'm good to go there, I create, and then it takes me to my short-term plan template. So once I get here, I can just update my daily plan. So if I go to update daily plan, you'll notice that my client said that she was training Monday through Saturday, all in the AMs. So those are my options. And I put what we're doing on a daily basis relative to that training schedule and relative to what we wanted to do as we laid out inside of our mesocycle or short-term plan. And then finally, we just have a profile section where we can upload documents. We can write additional notes that don't have anything to do with consultation. And we can just put anything there that's relevant. And that's it.
That's it. You say it like it's this simple little thing. And guys, I know there are some questions about using CoachRx, and we will get to them. I just have one little thing I want to share with you once I can figure out how to share my screen again. 1 second, guys. Ooh. Can you guys share? Can you guys see my screen again?
Yep, we got you, Georgia.
Awesome. Technology is not always my friend. So guys, as you can see, Carl put so much love into developing CoachRx, and it's a really amazing platform for our CCP coaches, our coaching certificate program coaches, to really be able to enhance their efficiency and just write better programs and get their clients better results. Now, if you were paying attention to this webinar, and I really hope you guys were listening, what you will have realized is it's not just about habit hacking, and it's not even just about having a platform like CoachRx that is going to make you a really great coach. It really is having the competency, the knowledge, and the systems behind you to be able to coach like Carl does and write programs like he just showed inside of CoachRx. And now that doesn't happen overnight. And if you are like looking at what just happened and you're like, I don't do that, I don't know how to identify priorities, I'm not sure how to take my assessment data and turn it into this beautiful periodized program, that is okay. I've been there, Carl has been there. We were both students of CCP, and it's really in that education under the mentorship of James Fitzgerald that we were able to develop that confidence, the efficiencies, and really all the knowledge we need to have fulfilling coaching careers. And it is having that behind you that makes coaching so much more enjoyable, because once you have efficiencies in place, the method and the systems in place, you get to really focus on the parts of coaching that you love the most. So you can see this little side-by-side comparison I have up on the screen, and that is for the two options that I have for you guys to take after this call today. And number one is OPEX CCP. And if you are really serious about being a professional coach, you want to put in place the method that you just saw today, and you want everything that's on the left-hand side of that screen with little tick marks, then CCP is going to be the program for you, and ultimately it's going to be what you want to take. It is our mentorship and professional coaching program. If you're not sure, like you're not ready for that commitment, that is okay too. We do have an introductory course called Programming Principles. It's just an introduction to program design. And like, if you take it, you're probably going to finish and be like, all right, now I want to do CCP. but it is a good way to dip your toes into our education system. You're going to get a 7-day free trial of CoachRx, so you can actually get inside of there and play around with it for a little bit. And we are going to give you a 50% off code for it for the next 24 hours, so you can get a good discount there. If you're interested in CCP, your next step is simply to apply and schedule a call. I am going to put a link in the chat box to be able to do that. And then if you're interested in the programming principles discount and you want to get that 50% off, then I will also link in the chat box here a discount code and a link to be able to do that. So I've thrown those in the chat box, guys. I'll do it again, and you're also going to get an email right after this to make sure you know exactly what you need to do, either apply to CCP or buy your programming principles at 50% off. And guys, even if you are thinking about applying for CCP, you can do programming principles too. And when you move forward with CCP, we will discount your programming principles fees and put that towards your CCP. So either way, you can't lose there, and it's a really good risk-free way to try our education. Guys, let's get into Q&A. So start throwing in the chat box any questions you have about the last hour or so. Ryan has one that I think we should get to right away, and that's how can they access CoachRx? To access CoachRx, you do need to be a CCP coach, but you do get a 7-day free trial of it if you take our programming principles course as well. Let's see what else. And Carrie was in the old CCP. Yes, you will be able to get access to that as well. What I would recommend doing is just contacting CCP support so they can get you set up. David asks, how does the client access the info in CoachRx? Carl, could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, right now, guys, CoachRx isn't extremely client-facing, and that's intentional. Right now, we want this platform to be mostly for the coach. So where your client will have access to CoachRx, or where they need access to CoachRx, is when you onboard a client, they're sent an email, and in that email, they're automatically sent an intake form, an equipment list, and a training schedule. So they update that inside of CoachRx. Once they update that, you get a notification that that's updated, and they're out. Unless they need to go in and update any of those things, they're not accessing CoachRx on a day-to-day basis. And I know I've said this a few times, but we have some cool things on the roadmap that will change that in the near future. But we'll just leave it at that for now.
So there was a question from Sten, which was, do you recommend combining it with TrueCoach?
Yes.
Thank you, Carl. Nice and simple. Guys, keep getting those questions rolling in. And David, TrueCoach really comes in once you put pen to paper and do your weekly program design for the client to be able to receive that.
Yeah, so guys, just to make it really clear, we're not designing training programs in CoachRx. Remember what I talked about before, this is like the coach's brain. So this is where like our principles sit, this is where our client data sits. So we're not designing training programs in CoachRx yet.
Not yet. We'll leave it at that, guys. Guys, keep those questions rolling in. We do have about 3 more minutes before we get on to our next. Are there any prerequisites for education for CCP? Nick, I'll answer that one. There are not any prerequisites from an education standpoint. We do just like to have a conversation with you when you apply, and that is to make sure you're in an environment to be successful. We do like you to, well, you have to do case studies when you go through CCP, so you really get practical experience coaching people. So we want to make sure that you're going to be able to do that you understand all the expectations, because, you know, CCP is a commitment. It is a commitment to being a professional fitness coach, and you are going to work for it, but the payoff at the end is really just huge from the perspective of career growth. And then Josh had asked about habit tracking and nutrition in the future. Carl, wanna go there?
Yeah, I just replied back. I just said Josh dot 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 yes.
I think
Guys,
that's important.
I'm always really careful on is like promising something with a time frame on it, because that's bitten me a few times. So I'll just keep going back to I probably everything that you guys are thinking is on the roadmap. And if you guys are not in, or if you guys are in Coach RX, or if you have a trial inside of Coach RX, there's a support section where we urge all of our coaches to go in and give us feedback and tell us what they want inside of this thing and give us ideas of how to make this thing better, because we're looking at every single one of those things. And I will say that some of the pieces of feedback that we've gotten have made it onto the roadmap.
I do want to ask you this question, Carl, that David asked, which is the standard of coach that we're targeting for CCP. And do we think coaches with undergrad degrees and a couple years of fitness or CrossFit coaching, is it worthwhile for them? I'm asking you because of your experience prior to doing CCP. So you can really speak to it from a personal level.
Yeah, gosh, guys, I mean, that's a great question. Before when I was just like an ambassador of OPEX, right? When I was like, well, I think it was OPT, but when I was an ambassador of this thing, right, back in the day, and people would ask me about OPEX, OPT, and they would ask like, should I do it? Like, should I do that? Or should I do this other thing? Should I do this other thing? And I spent a few years, not even close to the amount of years that James spent, but I spent a few years spending a lot of money learning a bunch of different things from a bunch of different people, which was great. I wouldn't change that for anything, but James already did that stuff, right? Like James did that for decades, right? Went around and, spent time with Paula Quinn, spent time with this guy, spent time with Chuck, he spent time with all of these people, and he put all of these things into one system, right? So when I first got into OPEX OPT, I was like, man, like this is everything I've been looking for, because it hits all of the things that I wanted to go out and learn and improve my coaching game in. Like it's all in CCP, right? So no matter what our backgrounds are, and just to give context, my background was I went to school, exercise physiology, did the CSCS thing, thought I wanted to be a collegiate strength conditioning coach, right? And I came into OPEX and I learned a ton, right? And gosh, I think the program's better today than it was back then. So yeah, I don't think it matters what your experiences are. It's always good to see it from a different lens. And I guarantee you there's things that are inside of OPEX CCP that you've never even thought about. So gosh, yeah, obviously I'm very biased and I'm like, yeah, everyone takes CCP, but I'm saying that because I actually believe it. And I've been there before.
Yeah, our team, we were all CCP coaches before we worked for OPEX. So we are super passionate about it, guys, and really appreciate you all spending the last hour with us. We will wrap up now. I do want you to know that we have an email coming your way. It'll have a recording. So if you want to go over any of the pieces from today, you'll be able to do that. And it will also have links in there for you to either apply to CCP or to claim your programming principles offer and get 50% off for the next 24 hours. So do keep your eyes on your inbox, and we look forward to working with you in the future, guys. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, everyone. We appreciate it.
Bye.